The morning mist hung low over Baker Street, curling in pale ribbons around the iron posts of the gas lamps. Their amber glow seeped through the haze, casting long shadows over the cobblestones. Somewhere in the distance, the slow, steady clop of horses' hooves echoed drowned, deliberate, as if time itself moved to their rhythm. The wooden wheels of a cart creaked as it rolled over uneven stones, and the faint tang of coal smoke drifted through the air, mingling with the sharper scent of wet leather harnesses and damp wool coats. It was London in the early 1960s, a city still holding onto the edges of an older century, its breath warm with tradition even as the modern world pressed in. At that hour, shopkeepers were just beginning to stir. The brass bell above a bakery door gave a soft jingle as Mr. Fowler, his apron dusted white, stepped outside to sweep the front step. His breath clouded in the cold, and he paused to nod at the milkman passing by, a man with hands red from the chill, balancing a metal crate clinking with glass bottles capped in silver foil. The milk, fresh from farms in the outskirts, cost only a few pennies, but in that moment it felt like a small luxury, the kind that made mornings gentler. Along the street, an old woman in a navy coat stood with her scarf drawn tight, waiting for the cart carrying coal sacks to stop at her door. The delivery boy, barely 16, swung one over his shoulder with a practiced motion, his boots splashing through shallow puddles left by the night's rain. Somewhere overhead, the steady hiss of a gas lamp burned on, its mantle glowing against the stubborn fog. A sight so ordinary then, but almost impossible now. By mid-morning, the traffic grew. Not the impatient roar of engines, but the mingled noises of a city between eras. An omnibus rumbling by with its conductor calling for fares, a young man pedalling past on a Raleigh bicycle, a cab horse snorting and stamping as its driver leaned down to light a cigarette. The advertisements on the brick walls spoke of new refrigerators and televisions. But, in the corners of shop windows, you could still spot tins of loose-leaf tea with labels from decades before, faded but proud. The street itself had a kind of rhythm, a pulse in which every sound, every smell, was part of a larger harmony. The clatter of metal against stone, the call of a newspaper boy shouting headlines about the Beatles' latest single, the faint, almost sweet scent of chestnuts roasting from a vendor's cart. Life was not quiet, but it was unhurried, like a melody that had no need to resolve too soon. Years later, Baker Street would wear a different face. The cobblestones gave way to smooth asphalt, and the hiss of gas lamps was replaced by the cool, unwavering gleam of LED streetlights. The air, once heavy with coal smoke, now carried the faint tang of exhaust, tempered by the scent of fresh brewed coffee drifting from the buses, sleek and silent compared to their rattling predecessors, slid past mirrored facades that reflected the changing sky. On rainy evenings now, when the pavements gleam under sodium light, the echoes of the past sometimes seem to rise from beneath the surface. If you stand still enough, you might almost hear the clop of a horse's hooves beneath the hum of tires, or catch the ghost of coal smoke hidden in the drizzle. The same stretch of street holds two Londons at once, the one that was, and the one that is layered like thin veils of fog. For those who remember, the transformation is both a marvel and a loss. Modern Baker Street is brighter, cleaner, and swifter, but it no longer smells of bread just out of the oven or sounds like a horse shaking its bridle at dawn. Still, if you close your eyes and let the traffic fade, you might hear the bell of the old bakery door, or feel the press of a damp wool coat brushing past in the morning chill. And sometimes, in the pause between buses, when the air holds its breath, it's as if the street itself remembers just for a heartbeat every footstep it has ever carried. Far across the city, in a place where the streets wake slower and the colors are brighter. Another story was beginning to stir. The stalls were being set up, the air scented with fresh fruit and strong coffee, and the sound of bargaining was about to weave its way into the day. The first light of day always seemed softer along Portobello Road, as though the sun knew to slip gently between the crooked lines of terraced houses. In the early 1960s, before the crowds came, the air was brisk and damp, carrying with it the earthy scent of fruit piled high in wooden barrows. Costermongers, their voices rough with the cold, called out their wares in a sing-song rhythm. Sweet pears, ripe as summer, each note carrying down the street like a thread pulling the morning together. The wheels of handcarts rattled against the worn stones, their iron rims leaving dark trails where the dew clung. Women in headscarves leaned over baskets, pressing fruit gently with gloved fingers, bargaining in the easy, half-smiling way of regulars who knew the sellers' children by name. The smell of fresh bread from a nearby bakery mingled with the sharper tang of oranges stacked in pyramids, their skins glistening under the watery light. Overhead, washing lines strung between upstairs windows sagged under the weight of damp shirts swaying in the breeze. Somewhere behind a shuttered cafe door, the hiss of a kettle promised the first cups of tea of the day. Portobello Road was a street in motion, yet unhurried. Even the vendors seemed to work at the pace of conversation, pausing to share a joke or comment on the weather. Their barrows were painted in faded greens and blues, the paint worn away where countless hands had gripped the edges. A penny here, a tuppence, their transactions small enough to slip into memory without the need for keeping count. By late morning, the market swelled. The cries of the sellers tangled with the low hum of radios playing pop songs from crackling speakers. Cliff Richard, maybe, or The Shadows, and the scent of hot roast chestnuts drifted through the air, sweet and smoky. A bus trundled past at the far end of the street, red paint dulled by grime, its conductor leaning out to wave at a friend on the pavement. The market stalls leaned toward one another like old friends in conversation, their canvas awnings fluttering with every gust. Decades later, Portobello Road would wake in a very different way. Instead of the metallic clatter of barrow wheels, there was the soft thump of shop doors opening, the hiss of espresso machines, and the murmur of tourists speaking in half a dozen languages. The old fruit sellers had given way to antique dealers arranging silver spoons in velvet-lined cases, vintage clothing merchants fussing over racks of denim and lace, and cafe owners arranging neat rows of croissants behind glass. The cries of costermongers were gone, replaced by the click of cameras and the lilting tones of street musicians playing jazz on the corner. The colors had changed to where once the street wore the muted browns and grays of working life, it now shimmered with painted shop fronts in bright blues, yellows, and reds. The smell of pears had been replaced by the dark roast aroma of coffee and the buttery warmth of pastries. Even so, if you stood very still in the early morning before the first tour groups arrived, you could almost hear the ghost of a vendor's call threading its way through the chatter. Some locals say the soul of the old market lingers in the quiet moments, when a shaft of sunlight catches the edge of a tin sign, or when a sudden gust carries the scent of apples from a nearby stall. The street, like the city, has learned to hold many layers at once, folding the past into the present like the pages of a well-worn book. And while Portobello Road has become a destination for the world, for those who remember, it is still a street that wakes in the same way it always has, slowly, with the hum of life growing richer as the hours pass. Not far away, as the day gives way to the glow of evening, another part of London prepares to shine. Neon tubes flicker awake, signs blaze to life, and the heart of the city begins to beat faster under the bright, relentless lights of Piccadilly Circus. The rain had stopped just before dusk, leaving Piccadilly Circus slick and shimmering as if the city itself had been polished for the night. In the 1960s, the neon signs were already alive, fizzing faintly in the damp air, their warm halos bleeding into the fog that clung to the rooftops. The hum of electricity seemed to join the rhythm of London's heartbeat, a steady undercurrent beneath the swirl of traffic and voices. Raindrops clung to the black iron railings and the brims of felt hats, glinting briefly before sliding away. From the steps of the Shaftesbury Memorial Fountain, you could watch the whole circus of the city unfold. Buses lumbered around the curve, their wet tires hissing on the road. Taxi doors slammed, and the muffled click of polished shoes tapped out impatient patterns on the pavement. In the glow of the signs, couples leaned together beneath umbrellas, their shadows stretching across puddles painted in flickering reds and blues. Somewhere nearby, a theatre queue shifted forward, the smell of damp wool and cigarette smoke curling into the cold air. The advertisements above seemed almost alive, chines on vermouth in looping script. Players Navy cut glowing bright, and the famous Bovril steam cup, its warmth so vividly rendered you could almost smell the beefy broth. Each sign pulsed and shimmered, their imperfect edges reminding you they were made by human hands bending glass and filling it with light. On rainy nights, the colors danced twice, once on the signs, and again in the mirrored streets below. Street photographers lingered at corners, cameras ready for the moment, a bright umbrella tilted just so, or a double-decker crossed the frame under a halo of neon. The air was busy with sound. The crackle of the lights, the buzz of conversation, the lurch of bus gears, and the deep, comforting rumble of the city at work and at play. Today, Piccadilly Circus greets you with a different kind of light. The neon fizz is gone, replaced by vast, seamless digital billboards that blaze with colors so sharp they seem to cut into the night. They make no sound, no hum, no flicker, just a constant, silent radiance that floods the square. Logos shift in an instant, one image dissolving into the next without the pause that once gave the night its rhythm. The crowd has changed to the suited theatergoers and uniformed doormen have given way to a restless mixturists with selfie sticks. Street performers in silver body paint, skateboarders weaving between clusters of people. Music comes not from distant radios, but from portable speakers, thudding out bass lines. The air still carries the smell of rain on tarmac, but now it's spiked with the aroma of takeaway noodles and coffee in paper cups. Yet there is a thread between then and now, stitched into the way people stopped us for a heartbeat to look upward, whether it's the gentle fizz of neon or the fierce glow of a 4,000 display. Piccadilly still casts its spell, still makes you feel as if you're re-standing at the pulsing center of something greater than yourself. And if you catch the square just after a shower, when the pavements are still wet, the reflections are still there, carrying the lights in ripples as buses and footsteps disturb their surface. The city has changed its costume, but the stage remains the same. Beyond the bright heart of the West End, where the river's slow voice begins to rise, another London waits. The Southbank at night whispers with footsteps on wooden planks, the murmur of water against stone, and the soft promise of stories yet to be told. Long before the glass towers rose across the river, the Southbank woke to the sound of work. In the early mornings of the 1960s, mist clung low over the Thames, blurring the outline of St. Paul's Dome across the water. Barges nudged the docks, their hulls groaning softly as they settled against the timbers. Dock workers, shoulders hunched against the cold, heaved crates and sacks from the decks, their boots thudding on wet planks. The air was thick with the smell of river mud, diesel, and the faint sweetness of tobacco smoke curling from a foreman's pipe. Each sound seemed to belong to the river itself, the slap of water against pilings, the clatter of chains on wood, the low calls between men as they guided cargo into the yawning mouths of warehouses. Their coats were heavy with rain, the hems darkened where they brushed against puddles. Sometimes the morning's silence would break with a burst of laughter. A joke shouted across the quay, vanishing into the fog. From the bridges above, you could watch the scene like a slow balacranes swinging overhead. Gulls wheeling low for scraps, bargemen in flat caps leaning into their work. The city moved at the pace of the river then, its commerce as much a part of the tide as the current itself. By midday, the scent of fried fish from a riverside cafe would drift along the banks, mingling with the tang of rope and salt. Decades later, the riverbank would trade its crates and winches for a different kind of life. Now, the timbers underfoot belong not to docks but to a broad, open promenade where couples stroll with paper cups of latte, steam curling upward into the cool air. The calls of dockworkers have given way to the music of buskers' violinists under fairy lights, a lone saxophone pouring out slow blues, even a juggler whose pins flash against the sunset. The skyline itself has shifted. Glass spires rise where soot-streaked warehouses once stood, their reflections glittering on the Thames after dark. Restaurants spill their warmth onto the pavement, their outdoor tables strung with tiny lights that sway in the breeze. The air smells now of roasting chestnuts, mulled wine in winter, or street food from a dozen countries on summer evenings. Yet, if you pause along the railings, looking down at the river's slow churn, the past is still there in the rhythm of the tide. You might hear, beneath the laughter and music, the ghostly thump of boots on wet timber, the scrape of a crate sliding into place. The Thames remembers every sound it has carried, every hand that has worked along its banks. The Southbank whispers in more than one voice, now part memory, part present, each folding into the other as the city walks by without noticing. But for those who linger, the echoes are still strong enough to touch. And just a few miles east, in a corner where narrow streets bend around red brick terraces, a small pub door swings open, spilling light, voices, and the comforting clink of pint glasses into the cool night air. On a damp Tuesday evening in the East End, sometime in the mid-1970s, the corner pub glowed like a hearth against the drizzle. Its windows, filmed with condensation, blurred the yellow light within, making it seem warmer still. Inside, the air was a living thing, thick with cigarette smoke curling under a ceiling, the color of old parchment, the scent of beer and fried onions, heavy in every breath. Wooden tables, worn smooth by decades of elbows and pints, crowded the narrow room. The regulars held their usual posts. Jack in the far corner nursing his bitter and a day's racing paper, the Doyle brothers at the bar, voices rising as they argued over West Ham's latest performance. Mrs. Keegan perched on her stool with a half-pint and an endless supply of gossip. The barmaid, hair piled high, gold hoop earrings swinging, moved between them with the ease of someone who de-learned every order by heart. A pint of mild was 25 pence, served in heavy glasses that left rings of foam on the wood. From the jukebox in the corner, the crackle and twang of a country tune bled into the raucous laughter from the darts game near the back. Boots scraped over the sticky floor, and the occasional cheer erupted when someone hit double top. The room hummed with the easy rhythm of people who'd known each other for years, their conversations folding over one another like the verses of a familiar song. Outside, rain hissed against the pavement, but in here time felt as though it had stopped. The pub wasn't just a place to drink, it was the anchor of the street. the warm centre where the day's worries were drowned in ale and argument. Today, the same building still stands at the bend of the road, but its face has been remade. The nicotine yellow ceiling has been painted white, strings of Edison bulbs casting a soft, curated glow. The old beer taps have given way to a polished row of chrome, each one pouring craft brews with names that sound more like poems than pints. The chalkboard above the bar lists pale ales, IPAs, and a locally roasted coffee stout. The bar stools are still there, but now they hold a different crowd, young couples in denim jackets sharing small plates, friends photographing their brunch, a man tapping away on a laptop between sips of cold brew. The scent of smoke is gone, replaced by the faint aroma of avocado toast and rosemary chips drifting from the open kitchen. The laughter remains, though it spills from the open door on summer evenings, mingling with the sounds of passing bicycles and the low rumble of buses. If you look closely, you can still see the ghosts of the old regulars in the corners, leaning back with a pint and a story ready to tell. The building has learned to hold both worlds, the one of clinking darts and cigarette haze, and the one of latte foam art and playlists curated for Sunday afternoons. And somewhere beyond the pub's glow, in another part of the city, where time and tide have shaped the streets in quieter ways, a story begins along a narrow lane where ivy climbs the walls and the past still presses close against the present.